Welcome aboard, Kaustav Chatterjee from Trains and Dioramas. I'd just like to thank you, Kaustav, for taking time away from your family this evening or this afternoon, as it is in India, to talk to me on model railway techniques. So welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Darren. It's been really exciting to be here for sure. So, we did that little collab, I think, about a month ago. And I think that's when this interview idea came up. And I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so lovely. Thanks for coming along, as I said. So obviously, Kaustav is the wizard behind Trains and Dioramas, which is his his YouTube page. So he can also be found on Facebook and Instagram at Trains and Dioramas, at all in one word. Or he also has a website, www.trainsanddioramas.com. So, Kaustav, tell us about your modelling prowess or your history of your modelling. How did you get into it? How did you get into model trains?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very weird story, really, because model railroading or model trains, it's not really so-called a popular hobby here in India. Yeah, there are a lot of socio-economical, I would say, reasons behind it. Of course, it's for a country like India, it's definitely an expensive hobby. I mean, it's an expensive hobby if you really look at it anywhere in the world. And for a country like India, it's definitely way more expensive than what normally people could afford. So I always liked making 3D models as a kid, and and the art and craft classes in school and things like that. So I think the first time I saw proper model railroad, it was sort of, I think it was a toy fair, I think back in Calcutta. So Calcutta is my hometown.
Sure.
So there was a toy fair where I saw two proper model railroads. So there's one person who is from Calcutta, and he sort of started bringing in some European model trains. So Rocco, Fleischmann, and
Lovely.
and things like that. Yeah, I mean, really, really good models, and that's where I first discovered model railroading. So it's it's, I think it was 2000 or 2000, maybe 99, 2000 or something like that.
Good 20 years in the hobby. So lovely.
20 years in the hobby, yeah. So I think I didn't necessarily start in the hobby right then because I didn't really have any money. I was still, then I had to move to college. And then after college, I got my job. And then I think I effectively started, seriously in model railroading maybe sometime in 2005 or 6, I would say. So that's when I got my first proper model train set. I still remember it's a Buckman, I think the 282 Northern set. So I didn't run very long, or even run properly, but that's how it all started.
Sure. So bring us forward to your modelling as it is today. You're predominantly American N scale. And pretty well, besides locomotives and wagons, your modelling is pretty well scratch build everything. Is that correct?
That is correct. So I think I started with N scale, and that project also, it's actually the 10th year running for that. So November 2010, I actually started with Wrightsville Port. So and I sort of had to procure all the item for about 2-3 years before that, and started planning it, and started building some of those ships and cranes, and they actually those were built even before I started anywhere with the track plan or anything like that.
Sure.
So if you really consider that, maybe effectively I started working on that since 2008. So the reason I chose N scale is definitely space. So I was working the job. I was living in a rented apartment. I was working the job. I didn't know how long I'm gonna stick to.
Sure.
So space and mobility and all those things were real consideration. So that's why I chose N scale. And I got most of the tracks, the locomotives, the rolling stock, and maybe one or two buildings here and there. But other than that, everything is scratch built in my N scale layout.
Little world, sure. So I'm interested why you chose American, just purely because the availability within India to get it at a reasonable price, or sort of can you talk us through that? How you sort of chose American N scale?
Yeah, so I think what happened is, when I started looking for starting with model railroading, right? I got my first job, I had some money at hand, and I just wanted to, buy my first train set. So the first consideration was size. So I really, didn't have enough space, so I needed something small. So that's where N scale came into picture. And the
Sure.
reason I got into American is simply, I believe, because I wasn't necessarily exposed to other N scale, uh, locomotives, rolling stock, or train sets, so to speak, like European or British. What happened is I started by joining. It's not there anymore for quite a few years. There's a forum that used to run all model railroading, and the proprietor, I mean the owner of that model train group, all model railroading, Seamus. His actual name was, I'm forgetting. Paul something. He was a very famous harmonica player in the UK as well.
Sure.
And so that's where I started learning about model railroading.
Right.
And, and one thing led to the other. I started seeing N scale, American stuff, and started following the work of back then who were, really doing good work in model railroading in that, all model railroading forum. And I just, thought that, yeah, that's something that I could do. And,
Yeah. Nice. Nice.
and yeah, yeah. And then the reason for American is pretty much because I got exposed to American,
Sure.
railroading before anything else, other
Yeah.
than, of
Sure.
course, Indian railroading, but there was no
Yep.
scene of Indian model railroad
Yeah. Sure.
even
Sure.
today. So you forget about 20 years ago. Yeah.
Lovely. Lovely. So, who would be your modelling influences? So, to give you some sort of a minor, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Brandl out of Germany, he's just does phenomenal landscaping. And a countryman of yours, and also a dear friend of yours, my understanding, is Vikas
Hmm.
Chander, who
Yeah.
I've viewed his YouTube videos in regards to Train Controller, which is some software that I use to run my layout. So, who would your
Hmm.
modelling influences be?
So I think my influence comes from a lot of people. So as I said, the first time I got exposed to proper model railroading was actually, I remember his name. His name is Paul Templar, or as he was known back then in the model railroading community as Seamus. So
Sure.
his modeling was phenomenal. So he primarily used to build, American railroad, though he was a British man, and his focus was logging and beautiful scenery, wonderful trestles, and the really creative design
Sure.
elements, so to speak. He would build a little 4x2 N scale layout, and you'll feel like when the photos are taken, you'll feel like you're looking at a big, really big, possibly, 8x4 layout or something like that. So
Yeah. Sure.
I think he was, I would consider as my first inspiration. And then after it just, went on and on with very different people as I was discovering. At one point of time, I had a long discussion about Byron, or with Byron Henderson, about designing layouts. So I was just, trying to get my first layout. And as it happens, the first time you want to make a model railroad, you want to fit everything in. You want to fit
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
trestles. You want to fit those mountains, one helix, and God knows,
Yeah. Sure.
three industries and all that, and
Yeah. Yeah.
possibly in a 6x3 space.
Yeah.
So I think his ideas of giving things space in a model railroad definitely influenced me a lot in my initial
Yeah.
days.
Sure.
And finally, I would say, when it comes to me starting with my model railroading, or the design itself, it's the design that I have for my N-scale layout is Ian Rice's design. So
Right. Okay.
if you really look at how he designs his railroad and how he sort of draws those artwork and gives a representation of what it exactly is. I mean, though it is a 2D top view, you still get a beautiful understanding of how you should be building a particular scene.
Sure.
And that's where I took my initial inspiration from. And
Yeah.
I think because of these three individuals were really crucial to start my hobby, and I think they sort of shaped a lot of my
Yep.
ideas and the way I look at designing a railroad or even building a scenery. There's a lot of influence of these three individuals in my work. And then, of course, later in the day, as I came to know about Vikas, I think I met Vikas in one of those online forums, 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And he is absolutely a master model maker. So
He
there
is,
is no
isn't he?
question about it.
Yeah, he's gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, there's
gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that he's possibly one of the best in the world and definitely the best in India, though a lot of people don't really know about his work here in India. He's pretty famous outside. And then when it comes to the original work, another individual that I think, I got introduced to Ranjiv, and his work was extremely inspirational from the perspective that he is sort of, he built a complete Indian railway empire, everything from scratch. I mean, other than just the tracks and some, control mechanisms and DCC, tools, everything that he has. I mean, starting from the building, the station, the even the trains themselves, like locomotives, the rolling stock, everything is scratch built from hand. And he achieved that within just 10 years time. So he started his railroad empire back in 2010, and I started my little railroad back in 2010 as well. And the progress that he made is I'm nowhere near to that. So I think that's pretty much how I would sum it up in terms of inspirations.
Yeah, lovely. I know Ranjiv, he's on my list to interview. I have emailed him.
Awesome.
So I just don't need to organise a time at some particular in the very near future to have him on as well. So now, obviously, there's sort of two parts to your YouTube channel, so to speak. There's trains and obviously the diorama side of things. So where I first came across your work was, and I'll bring up the screen for you to have a look at. So is this lovely ship that you've built? I'm assuming you built that from scratch. So now, to give people some sort of idea, I did some rigging on a recent ship build of mine, and it had probably 1/10 of the rigging that this did, and it was very frustrating. And compared to what you've got a tool ship here where you've built sails and all the rigging in 1:72 scale. So can you sort of walk us through this model and this scene, I suppose? How did this come about? Because it's a phenomenal piece of modelling.
Thank you so much, Darren. Of course. So I think that is actually so the name of the channel and the name that I had sort of chosen for my website and the work itself sort of tells you that I am not necessarily focused just on model railroading, because I think I love miniatures in all shape and form. So I have interest in miniature as a whole, miniature art itself. And that is why I think in my recent works and videos, what you might notice is that even when I'm bringing those ideas into model railroading, I'm not necessarily doing things a traditional way, because a lot of focus has been gone into creating realism and making and telling a story, so to speak. So I am a big fan of tall ships, and it started because as a kid I had a little book about pirates, and and absolutely, and it's actually it's fascinating how your sort of childhood memories and the stories that you hear sort of shape things up for you even as an adult, or even when you grow much older. So it's a little book that is mostly not even a translation. So it was in my mother tongue is Bengali. So it's it's sort of like I would say adopted stories from the popular pirate folklores that we have into Bengali, and then there are some quite a few Bengali writers who used to write stories, even though it's in Bengali, but they're all pretty much had a theme of the Western world, and many of those sort of built around piracy and ocean and sea and things like that.
Right.
So I think that the fascination started from that point. And as I started, looking at models and growing, understanding or exploring models, I knew that one day I had to build a tall ship.
Yeah.
And this is, believe it or not, this is actually my very first tall ship build. I've never built, a proper sailboat before. I mean, this is absolutely the very first model. And how it sort of started is I was visiting, and as you know, I mean, there is not a lot of space in India where you can walk into a store and see this.
Yeah, sure.
These kind of models. So I was in one of the model shop in Bangalore. I think back then I was visiting, or I lived there for 6 years, but I'm not really sure whether I picked up this particular model when I lived there or I was visiting. Most likely I was visiting after I left the city. So this is actually a Mamoli kit. So it's an Italian company that makes a fantastic kit, but it's a really advanced kit. So you don't necessarily get any framework other than just a few, laser cut, I think 3mm ply.
Yeah. Okay.
That just gives you the structure, and everything else is basically, the strips of wood and the dowels and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's when I picked it up, and that's how this whole thing started.
Yeah. Lovely.
Now, as it happens for me, I always go overboard with realism and, trying to make things as real as possible. So when you're mentioning rigging, the funny part about this boat is that all the rigging in this boat is actually operational. So you see all that, I think the rigging there, all the sails and even, the yards and things like that.
Yeah.
You can move them exactly like you can do in a real sailboat. So I studied a lot about sailboats and how the rigging happens. So that's how this one came about. I mean, you can open the sails, you can furl them, you can move the yards. So yeah. And then, of course, the story, I was not just happy with building a ship, so I had to put it in a diorama. So what could be better than, this particular kit was Blackbeard's sloop.
Right.
So I thought I'd make a diorama about, Blackbeard. And he is actually one of my, and going back to my stories about, the childhood stories.
Okay. That's
I
fantastic.
know about Blackbeard my entire life, so how can I not build a diorama about Blackbeard? So.
And I'm sure that takes pride of place in your home in India. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So. All right. We'll go on to your layout as it is. So probably people would recognise this off your YouTube channel. You recently did a lovely video on shunting Wrightsville Port. So can you? That's a fantastic overview. And I want to learn how you actually did this. That's probably for another time. But how you took this photo to make it look like it's actually Google Earth, so to speak. Talk us through the layout. We briefly touched on it before regarding the Yang Rice influences with the design. So tell us about your layout.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I was sort of for the first layout, there was, and to some extent, it was really frustrating, especially for my wife. I mean, we were just newly married, and and I had a pretty demanding job. I still do, but back then I was just starting with my career, and there was a lot of moving pieces here and there. But I would always find some time here, to figure out what I necessarily want. And as I was mentioning, you as a beginner, it's always difficult to prioritize. You always want as many things as you can to cram in that little layout of yours, your dream layout. Now, then essentially what started happening is that you just cross out one by one, because end of the day my focus was realism. So, and then when I came to this Yang Rice plan, it's actually called Coalport, Maryland. It's an HO scale plan. Even in HO scale, it's sort of like a small layout, I would say. I think it's 9 by 10 or something like that. It's a one wall bedroom layout. And the main point where it attracted me is that unique entrance, like how you enter the layout, and then the depth of it. I mean, though it's a switching layout, essentially, you don't necessarily see a lot of depth in a switching layout, right?
No.
So most of them are built on shelves, and you make a complex single nook or maybe a time saver, some of those classics. And you put possibly a car float to bring some to give them arrival and destination port or something like that. So I evaluated all those options, but the depth of this whole design, and then the opportunities to build those ships, and you already know, like as I was mentioning, I mean, ship is another part of my modeling, I would say, passion. So I love ships, I love cranes, I love ports, and I love trains. And what can be more engaging and fascinating than a port where I can sort of get everything that I love into one place? It is all crammed, to be honest, but it still looks natural. So it doesn't necessarily look overcrowded, because that's what the nature of port is. I mean, it's always crowded. So I think that's how the design came about. And then, once I finalized on the design, everything is scratch built. Everything is built based on a real prototype ship. I started with the ships and the cranes first. This crane, I think it came up in, one of my researches long time back. And I'm talking about back in 2008-9, where you wouldn't necessarily get a lot of high quality photos and things like that on web search, right? And even the materials were limited. But, whatever I could find, I used those as reference photos, and everything is built from scratch. I mean, this particular crane is one of the first models that I built. It's all N-scale rails, some toothpicks, matchsticks, and mostly, cardboard and electric, wires. So that's pretty much what this crane is. And not just this one. I mean, all the other cranes and ships that I built, pretty much that.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know, harbour scenes, as you rightfully point out. It's got a certain grunge and romance to it, all in one. As you know, I'm currently building my harbour scene. I nearly finished the track work of still trying to work out where exactly I'm going to put the water's edge and the like in it. It's not that well planned at this point in time, but there's just something about water and harbours. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. It's just something needs to. There's a few layouts out there that do it very well. This is obviously definitely one of them. So well done, definitely, good stuff.
Thank you.
So this is how I first came across your channel when I was doing the little barge scene. So people, so they know which barge we're talking about, is this little guy just here. You did a 3 or 4 part series, and I'll put a link, all these videos in below as well, on Trains and Dioramas YouTube page. And I remember going to the gym numerous times and just watching the weathering of this craft on the exercise bike, and I got so much from it, and it was phenomenal.
I'm so glad to know that, Darren. I mean, that definitely makes my day. So the reason I sort of did that extensive video about this barge, because I think that's the first video that where I sort of talked about most of the techniques that I've used. I mean, though before the barge, I mostly used cardboards and
Sure.
in some cases wood in that little bascule bridge.
Yeah.
And this is the time that I thought maybe I demonstrate something where people will be able to relate, which is styrene, because it's
Sure.
not really that common or available here in India. It's a very common modeling material, so that's why I decided to use that material for the barge.
Definitely.
And I'm really glad that you found that video, and that's how we became friends, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely. It was quite
it's
a
definitely
unique finding. As I said, I was just looking for weathering techniques, and I'd gone down the military modelling line as well, because some of those guys and girls do phenomenal jobs on anything related to ships and planes and helicopters and tanks. And so I just happened to stumble across this little barge video, and I don't know how many times I've watched it, at least half a dozen times. And some of the
that
techniques
definitely makes my day, Darren.
quite a number of techniques I used on that particularly the streaking technique that you build up over 4 or 5 passes of different colours and sort of different bristles on brushes. I think you used as well, which is quite phenomenal. So
it's really gritty. I mean, that's basically what I really wanted to bring in. The feel of that barge is that it actually tells a story. Like you look at the barge, you know that it's old. It has seen better days, and it's the owner of the barge is sort of
that's right,
doing whatever he can to get the very last
out,
penny out of that. Yeah, making money. So
even down to one of the little gentlemen at the back here. I think the one in the green, if you can see, Mr. Lou. I think you called him.
Exactly.
Mr. Lou.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So it shows how many times I have actually watched it. So I remember little details like that. I think it's quite. And I think that's the important thing of any modelling, whether it's model railroading or military modelling or even wargaming, I suppose, is wargaming obviously is a very fictitious type world. I suppose we are building a fictitious world as well, however, but it's the little stories within a scene I think is so important. And this little scene we're looking at here tells volumes. There's just so much going on, but it's a less is more scenario. It's just it's not cluttered. There's a lot, as I said, a lot going on. And different heights of buildings, which is really. I think Lance Minheim, who's an American chap that writes quite a nice book on model railroading as art, talks about setting a scene and how to place your buildings and having different perspectives and different heights of buildings just to portray a grand feeling, I suppose, of the model railway. And that's definitely something that comes across in this harbour scene right here.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, I mean, Lance, I think, I have definitely has gone through a lot of his, articles and even the website. I think his philosophies and the way he sort of looks at model railroading is pretty similar to how I look at it as well.
Sure.
And yeah, whether it's a scenery or I think when it comes to the art of model railroading, so that what I have discovered is that not model railroading in itself, it's called as one hobby, but it is actually not one hobby. I mean, there are so many different parts of hobby built within model railroading, right? Correct. I mean, you have the model train collectors, and for them, all that matters is that the trains.
Yeah.
And then you have another part where people are building layouts, but they're just simply interested in operating the model trains. They're just simply interested in running the trains or doing the operations or doing some switching or things like that. I think the part so I think the art of model railroading, the way I see it, is when you sort of consider this to be an art and a form of art where you are bringing it. You're not necessarily focusing just on the operations or just on the trains, but you're focusing on the realism of it. So that is definitely a different ballgame altogether. And I definitely focus more on the realism part, even though, and this is the surprising part, I think, in Wrightsville Port. So the entire layout is fictitious. Everything that you have, the track plan is taken from Ian Wright's plan,
Yeah.
which is an absolute freelance plan. This particular railroad doesn't follow any of the real railroads in the U.S. I have mix of rolling stocks from different railroads, or and things like that. But
Sure.
you look at it, it feels like yeah, this could be a real place.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the beauty of realism lies, because even though the railroad itself is fictitious, everything, the individual items, the cranes, the ships, the even that detailed conveyor belt, and the pneumatic grain unloader, all those things are real things.
Correct.
That I've used as elements in the layout, and that gives you a feel that this is actually a real place.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think you're sort of a bit like me. Suppose probably more freelance than prototype. I will get into sort of semi-prototypical operations. That's what my layout is built for. But I also like bogging myself down on hyper detailing a good scene as well. So, so that's just. I think that's you touched on it a few minutes ago. There's so many different aspects to this hobby. We've got electronics, we've got carpentry, we've got scenery, we've got photography. There's obviously guys and girls out there that take phenomenal photography of their layouts, and it's just the ultra realism that some of these people are getting is just phenomenal. So
this is a banyan tree. So it is one of the fig trees. It's definitely very common in India, but you also see that in Florida, Hawaii, and some of the tropical areas as well. So all these are prop roots, and what I had to do is that not just the main trunk, but I also sort of had to build those individual prop roots.
Sure.
And then comes the painting, and adding all these additional branches, and I use separate leaves. So yeah, I think I used a lot of unique techniques to give that dense feel of a tree branches, at the same time keeping it airy. So that's how you get to see that natural, sort of.
Now that's an in-scale size tree that you built there?
Now this actually is an HO scale size tree. Okay. So this is mostly into HO this is the same tree that I used in my last video about the Indian Railways diorama that I did for one of my friends. Yeah. So this is the same tree that I planted there.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's right there actually in the background here. This diorama. So so that is HO scale, and I have also, I'm also moving a little bit into different scales at this moment. I always had interest in dioramas, which are much bigger than N scale. But even when it comes to model railroading, I'm definitely into N scale. There are plans, in fact, plans are in motion to even get into 009 to look at, of course, about Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, so DHR. Yeah. So, and Ranjiv is definitely one of the inspirations to get me hooked into Indian narrow gauge. So I think it's expanding a little bit more than just N scale right now. And but coming back to your question, this is definitely HO scale and not N scale.
Lovely. So now, from memory, you did. There was I don't know if it was this vehicle that you did a video on, or was it the van that I saw? Definitely the van you did.
Right. So I think I did both actually. So I think it's a 3-part series of 3 GHQ vehicles: the van, the truck, and a forklift. Yep. So all these are white metal kits in N scale. So these are one of the very last few pieces that I did for the layout. To sort of set the scene. And in fact, what happened is I bought these kits quite some time ago. I just didn't have time to, sort of paint them and put them in place. So I just thought I would just, make videos about it and show the techniques of, achieving realism even in this size vehicles.
Yeah. Beautiful. So, there's the forklift you speak of there. So all right, so this is obviously how you and I
started
with this little baby here. So this is obviously, we did a video, as you said, about a month ago on I did HO kit form, you build it scratch build. So this is obviously your offering, and you can just see by the size how much detail you've put in this, considering the size of your index finger. I think it would be there, fingernail there. So, and it does float.
Exactly.
I did see a video when I was looking through your Instagram.
Does.
You did. I didn't pick that up at the time, but it does actually float. And obviously, you built that out of purely, or the hull and all that was purely out of cardboard, is my understanding.
Yeah. So I think I went back to my origins, so to speak, of building ships and boats. I think one of the ideas that came up when we initially started talking, Darren. So as I say, I think it was March or April back then. So we were thinking about, where should we start? And I think that's when you came up with the idea of, doing this sort of comparison between the scratch build and kit building. And I think, this sort of took me back to my initial days of model making, when I sort of used to work with very limited resources. So, cardboards and, just, scrap. And in fact, some of the articles that I wrote for N-Scale magazine back in the day, I even used a term called scrap building. So, because most of these materials are actually, comes out of a dustbin, unless, So that's what I did. And I went back to my roots and used cardboards. And of course, my techniques have improved since those days. So that's how it went.
And there's my little offering that doesn't have quite the detail, but it will come at some stage, and I'll put more photos up. But when it goes,
absolutely. I love this boat. I mean,
it's a gorgeous little boat.
You say that there are not a lot of details, but I think if you really look closely, the textures that you've got, the chipping that you've got, so those are, I think, the details that to look for. And that's, I think, one of the things that I sort of have, I would say, in my philosophy that has started to ingrain. So there is not always, so every different scales, every different model, it has its own story. So you don't necessarily put all the details into one place. So you really look at my boat, you don't really see all these chipping details and the beautiful little rust effects that you have done. So I haven't put those in because I just went with the flow of giving it the character in a very different way than how you have envisioned your build. So I think it's
to give you some sort of insight on that. Obviously, that's a resin hull, and that chipping purely came by accident, because it had, when I did the first coat of that hull, because I initially sprayed it with an automobile undercon, or primer, I should say, and then I did the first coat of like an off-whitey green colour that I mixed up. It just had this texture to it, and I'm thinking, I'm either going to sand that back to make that smooth, which is going to take me a long, long time, or I just did a dry brushing effect on that using like a slate grey colour, I think, from memory, and it came up like it was just battered around, and I just went with it. And as I said, purely by accident, which I'm sort of glad, because I didn't really want to have to sand that back. But so
I think that is one of the biggest fun part of making models, right? So unless you had told that, right, out on live video, no one would have guessed. And I think that's the best part about model making, is that these little tips and tricks that and taking advantage of the situation. I think that's how most of the model makers are very good problem solvers, because we have these problems all the time. And we just try work those disadvantages to our benefit, so to speak.
Sure. So, all right. So we talked about your layout, your modelling influences. Now, I think we need to go into your channel, because obviously that's how come you and I are sitting here halfway across the world talking to each other, is off your YouTube channel. So, Trains and Dioramas, putting up bi-weekly, maybe every 3 weeks at a maximum, sort of videos on various topics. Now, I'll just quickly go, I'll bring up your YouTube channel. So here we are here. So talk us through where the channel's going, I suppose. Trains and Dioramas, your hyper detailing of model is phenomenal. We've spoken about, and obviously there's the barge video there that we spoke of before. You've just done a lovely ultra realistic diorama for a dual gauge Indian Railway for a client of yours who, is my understanding, 3D prints all the bodies and all that fit on a ready to run mechanism. So talk us through what's currently on the editing floor, I suppose, in regards to Trains and Dioramas, in regards to your next video.
Right. I think, honestly, at this point, I possibly am taking a little bit of a break. So I think because the last video was a really big project. A lot of time and effort had gone into this video in terms of building it, but also, editing it. It's a 1 hour, 7 minute long video. So that sort of tells you, and every minute of it is sort of packed with, different. I think as of right now, I am sort of looking at different ways to, bring a little bit of, I would say, variety into the channel or the video, so to speak. So I think one of the things that's sort of becoming a little bit of an issue for me when it comes to running a YouTube channel is because the pressure of that constant uploads, and you keep on, you have to keep current and you have to keep producing content, but at the same time, my core philosophy is that to build something that is meaningful, that is something that is valuable, something that you, even if you look at after 10 years down the line, you would go back and say, that is a fantastic model. So I think the struggle that I have right now in terms of maintaining a YouTube channel is that I am not necessarily able to balance the two out and build quality models at the same time, build quality videos, and still deliver on a regular basis. I mean, even if it is I continued for the first half of the year, as you mentioned, pretty much 2 videos a month, but it seems like that is not going to be possible going forward, because some of the projects that I have in mind, some of the things that I really want to do, they will take more time for me to be able to, produce videos that frequently. So at this point, maybe I'm not even sure that where this channel is going, to be honest. So I definitely will, prioritize building models more than, being successful on YouTube, because as much as, I love to share my work with the world, and as much as I love the interactions and the fact that this sort of, exactly how you and I came to know each other. And I have so many friends that have, made over last, I think, about 2 years that I'm running the channel on YouTube. And I definitely, and that's precisely where the whole, I would say, the dilemma is, because I don't necessarily, I want to continue to contribute in terms of producing good content, but at the same time, it is becoming more and more difficult and stressful to balance it out. So maybe I'll take a little bit of a break at this point, and I'll create what they call as YouTube inventory. So build some good models, put those into the editing floor, and get those videos right, and then bring them back for your audience. So I think most likely that's where it is heading at the moment.
Yeah, I fully understand where you're coming from regarding the pressure we put on ourselves to deliver quality content. I've struggled. My channel's only been going half the amount of time yours has, probably even less. I've only just ticked over 12 months doing this game with 60 videos or whatever it is I've put up. But I don't think people realise how much work it actually is to do a basic how-to video.
Exactly.
You could, like, case in point, that little boat. You could make that literally, probably having everything there ready to go. You'd just about finish it in a half an hour, I would think. But you know what it's like. You videotape a little bit of it, and you go, okay, it's not quite in focus properly, so you got to manufacture another way to bring it back, to bring that hole back in, and to repaint it. It's never ending. So I
Yeah.
definitely can sympathise and empathise with you on that fact. And you and I have had
Yeah.
numerous long conversations
Yeah.
about this side of things, which is probably beyond the scope of what we need to talk about here. But you're right. Hence why I'm probably going to start doing my interviews again, because they
Mm-hmm.
are, I think they're reasonable content. I'm
Yeah.
getting some good people on like yourself coming up
Mm-hmm.
within the next few weeks, and they're a lot easier to do than a how-to video. So
Yeah.
there's just not the editing on the back end of it, or making the model, so to speak. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that when it comes to YouTube in itself, I mean, if you really want to, if you're, making just a blog or something like that, and
sure,
just, sort of like, staying in touch with people, like what we do in other social media like Facebook and Instagram, then it's a different story, right? I don't
yeah,
necessarily will be spending that much of time creating a quality video, spending, I think the music part of that last video, that itself took about 4 days to sort
yeah,
of, match and edit and, do all the jazz. So when you are necessarily producing that level of quality content,
sure,
it is difficult to sort of, continue doing that when it's a solo show, right?
yeah, that's
Because
right.
I don't necessarily have, assistants or people working with me who
No,
can
no,
make sure that, everything is in focus, and somebody is doing the editing, or somebody is, looking at the music piece, and all I'm focusing
sure,
is on building models.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
I know that there are other, people who did that successfully. Luke Tuan, for an
sure,
example, Merrick, from UK in recent days.
yeah,
There is another person on the military modeling side called Night Shift from, I believe he's from Russia.
right,
And, he's
okay,
got a pretty, successful channel as well within a very
sure,
short period of time. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that, different people have different ways to succeed on YouTube, but
yeah, yeah,
especially if you're small as of today, or you're starting new as of today, I think it matters about, how narrow your focus is, and a lot of, study about your target audience and things like that, and keep doing one thing repeatedly, right? So I think
yeah,
that is one of the things that YouTube recommends. Now, going by the initial part of our discussion, I am not focused into one thing, right?
yeah.
So
You and me
I
both.
have
So,
interests. Exactly. I have interest into, diorama, scale models. You can see some of the, Star Wars kit and all in the background, model
mm,
trains. So eventually, I cannot pin it on one target audience, and that's
sure,
possibly why it is so difficult. Even
yeah,
within model railroading, as I was looking at, some of the videos, that has, brought in traffic, there are, divisions right now. So for an example, you have Larry Puckett, who is a DCC guy in, YouTube,
yeah,
and he's doing really well, and, producing, contents that are very specific to DCC and only about DCC. Now, when I put out those DCC and JMRI specific videos, that did help a lot of people, and that did bring a lot of people to my channel. But my channel is not necessarily about DCC, and maybe,
yeah,
most of my viewers, or some of those viewers who at least found those videos and joined my channel, they're expecting more DCC content.
yeah, yeah,
And the very next one suddenly comes up, how to build ultra realistic model tree.
yeah,
They don't
yeah,
care about an ultra realistic model tree. And now, after you find a video about ultra realistic model tree, then suddenly comes up possibly, a fantastic looking barge. I'm not making a barge. Why do I care about a barge? And
yeah,
I think that is how it has become from YouTube standpoint, or visibility standpoint, the channel has become a bit diluted, I would
yeah,
say, at this point.
yeah,
So I think I sort of, as far as YouTube is concerned, need to rethink about my so-called video strategy and
sure,
marketing strategy, because that's what YouTube is all about.
sure,
It's
sure,
about marketing. It's about creating your target audience, the story, and things like that. So yeah, that's how it's going to go. I think going forward.
Yeah, we've had numerous long discussions about that, haven't we? Just about where our various channels are going, and I think you'll find I might do the odd video here and there that might not fit the mould, but I think I'm going to try to stick with the video podcasting, I think, for a while. So just to see how that goes, because there's not a lot of people out doing that type of thing. There's this week with Ken Patterson is probably the closest, but that's more of almost like a talk show.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's very interesting, whole concept, the YouTube thing. Not until you start making the videos do you realise what sort of a beast that it can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're a slave to the algorithm, and it's just changed again, as you know. So so at this point, just have to suck it and see, as they say, and see how we go. I thank you so much for taking some time out of your day again, away from your family, to come and chat with us here at Model Railroad Techniques. We're now 2 collaborations in, so I'll be expecting we'll do a third at some stage of some shape or form, I'm sure, if you're still interested in that. So just keep that.
I'm always interested, Darren. So just chat. I'm pretty sure that's something that will come up in the next few months.
Yeah, so. we'll work something out.
It's
so. If not, more discussions like this. So sure. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure being here.
Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Techniques.